Xenophon on Horsemanship. Translated by Maurice H. Morgan, Ph.D., Assistant Professor, Harvard University. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Xenophon on Horsemanship. Chapter 1. It has been my fortune to spend a great deal of time in riding, and so I think myself versed in the horseman's art. This makes me willing to set forth to the younger of my friends what I believe would be the best way for them to deal with horses. It is true that a book on horsemanship has already been written by Cimon. I mean the man who dedicated the bronze horse at the Eleusinion in Athens with his own exploits in relief on the pedestal. Still, I shall not strike out of my work all the points in which I chance to agree with him, but shall take much greater pleasure in passing them on to my friends, believing that I speak with the more authority because a famous horseman, such as he, has thought as I do. And then again I shall try to make clear whatever he has omitted. To begin with, I shall describe how a man, in buying a horse, would be least likely to be cheated. In the case of an unbroken colt, of course his frame is what you must test. As for spirit, no very sure signs of that are offered by an animal that has never yet been mounted. And in his frame, the first things which I say you ought to look at are his feet. Just as a house would be good for nothing if it were very handsome above but lacked the proper foundations, so too a war horse, if all his other points were fine, would yet be good for nothing if he had bad feet, for he could not use a single one of his fine points. The feet should first be tested by examining the horn. Thick horn is a much better mark of good feet than thin. Again, one should not fail to note whether the hoofs at toe and heel come up high or lie low. High ones keep what is called the frog well off the ground, while horses with low hoofs walk with the hardest and softest part of the foot at once, like knock-kneed men. Cimon says that their sound is a proof of good feet, and he is right, for a hollow hoof resounds like a cymbal as it strikes the ground. As we have begun here, let us now proceed to the rest of the body. The bones above the hoofs and below the fetlocks should not be very straight up and down, like the goats, for if they have no spring they jar the rider, and such legs are apt to get inflamed. These bones should not come down very low either, else the horse might get his fetlocks stripped of hair and torn in riding over heavy ground or over stones. The shank bones ought to be stout, for they are the supporters of the body, but they should not be thickly coated with flesh or veins. If they are in riding over hard ground, the veins would fill with blood and become varicose, the legs would swell and the flesh recede. With this slackening of the flesh, the back sinew often gives way and makes the horse lame. As for the knees, if they are supple in bending when the colt walks, you may infer that his limbs will be supple in riding. For as time goes on, all colts get more and more supple at the knees. Supple knees are highly esteemed, and justly, because they make the horse easier and less likely to stumble than stiff ones. Forearms stout below the shoulders look stronger and comelier, as they do in man. The broader the chest, so much the handsomer and the stronger is it, and the more naturally adapted to carry the legs well apart and without interference. The neck should not be thrown out from the chest like a boar's, but like a cock's, should rise straight up to the poll and be slim at the bend, while the head, though bony, should have but a small jaw. The neck would then protect the rider, and the eye see what lies before the feet. A horse thus shaped could do the least harm, even if he were very high-spirited, for it is not by arching the neck and head, but by stretching them out, that horses try their powers of violence. You should note also whether his jaws are fine or hard, whether they are alike or different. Horses whose jaws are unlike are generally hard-mouthed. A prominent eye rather than a sunken one is a sure sign that the horse is wide awake, and such a one can see further too. Wide nostrils mean freer breathing than close ones, and at the same time they make the horse look fiercer, for whenever a horse is provoked at another or gets excited during exercises, he dilates his nostrils very widely. A rather large poll and ears somewhat small give the head more of the look which a horse should have. High withers make the rider's seat surer and his grip on the shoulders stronger. A double back is easier to sit upon and better looking than a single one. A deep side, rather rounded at the belly, generally makes the horse at once easier to sit upon, stronger, and a better feeder. The broader and the shorter the loins, with so much the greater ease does the horse raise his forehand and bring up the hindquarters to follow. Then, too, the belly looks smallest, which, when it is large, is not only disfiguring, but makes the horse weaker and more unwieldy. The quarters should be broad and full in proportion to the sides and chest, and all these parts, if firm, would be lighter for running, and make your horse a great deal faster. If he has his buttocks well apart under the tail, with the line between them broad, he will be sure to spread well behind. In so doing he will have a stronger and a prouder look, both when gathering himself in and in riding, and all his points will be improved. You may take the case of men to prove this. Whenever they wish to lift anything from the ground, they do it with their legs apart rather than close together. The horse should certainly not have large stones, but this point cannot be determined in the colt. As for the hocks below, or the shanks and the fetlocks and hooves, I say about them here just what I did in the case of the forefeet. I will set down too how you are least likely to miss the mark in the matter of size. That colt always turns out the largest whose shanks are longest at the time of foaling, for the shanks do not grow very much in any quadrupeds as time goes on, but the rest of the frame grows so as to correspond to the shanks. It seems to me that by testing a colt's shape in the manner described, people would get, as a general rule, an animal with sound feet, strong, good conditioned, graceful, and large. Even though some alter as they grow, we should still apply these tests with confidence, since there are a great many more ugly colts that turn out handsome than handsome ones that turn out ugly. Chapter 2. It does not seem necessary for me to describe the method of breaking a colt, because those who are enlisted in the cavalry in our states are persons of very considerable means and take no small part in the government. It is also a great deal better than being a horse breaker for a young man to see that his own condition and that of his horse is good, or if he knows this already, to keep up his practice in riding, while an old man had better attend to his family and friends, to public business and military matters, than be spending his time in horse breaking. The man then that feels as I do about horse breaking will, of course, put out his colt. He should not put him out, however, without having a written contract made, stating what the horse is to be taught before he is returned, just as he does when he puts his son out to learn a trade. This will serve as a reminder to the horsebreaker of what he must attend to if he is to get his fee. See to it that the colt be kind, used to the hand, and fond of men when he is put out to the horsebreaker. He is generally made so at home and by the groom, if the man knows how to manage, so that solitude means to the colt hunger and thirst and teasing horseflies, while food, drink, and relief from pain come from man. For if this be done, colts must not only love men, but even long for them. Then, too, the horse should be stroked in the places which he most likes to have handled, that is, where the hair is thickest, and where he is least able to help himself if anything hurts him. The groom should also be directed to lead him through crowds, and to make him familiar with all sorts of sights and all sorts of noises. Whenever the colt is frightened at any of them, he should be taught, not by irritating, but by soothing him, that there is nothing to fear. It seems to me that this is enough to tell the amateur to do in the matter of horse breaking. Chapter 3. I shall now set down some memoranda to be observed in buying a horse already broken to riding, if you are not to be cheated in the purchase. First, then, the question of age should not pass unnoticed, for if he no longer has the markers, the prospect is not a glad one, and he is not to be disposed of so easily. His youth once made sure of, the way in which he lets you put the bit into his mouth and the headpiece about his ears should not escape you. This would be least likely to pass unnoticed if the bridle were put on and taken off in the sight of the purchaser. Next we ought to observe how he receives the rider upon his back. A great many horses hardly let come near them things whose very approach is a sign that there is work to be done. This too must be observed, whether when mounted he is willing to leave other horses, or whether when ridden near horses that are standing still he runs away towards them. Some horses also, from bad training, take flight towards home from the riding grounds. The exercise called the volte shows up a hard mouth, and even more the practice of changing the direction. Many horses do not try to run away unless the mouth is hard on the same side with the road for a bolt towards home. Then you must know whether, when let out at full speed, he will come to the poise and be willing to turn round. It is not a bad thing to try whether he is just as ready to mind when roused by a blow as he was before. A disobedient servant is of course a useless thing, and so is a disobedient army. A disobedient horse is not only useless, but he often plays the part of a very traitor. As I assume that the horse to be bought is meant for war, trial should be made of all the qualities that war itself puts to the test. These are jumping ditches, going over walls, breasting banks, and leaping down from them. You must try him riding uphill and down dale and along the slope. All these tests prove whether his spirit is strong and his body sound. He should not be rejected, however, if he does not perform them all very finely, as many animals fail, not from inability, but from want of practice in these feats. With instruction, habit, and practice, they may do all finely, provided they are sound and not vicious. But you must beware of horses that are naturally shy. The over-timid let no harm come to the enemy from off their backs, and they often throw the rider and bring him into the greatest danger. You must learn too whether the horse has any particular vice, shown towards other horses or towards men, and whether he is very skittish. These are all troublesome matters for his owner. You could much better discover objections to being bridled and mounted and other vices by trying to do over again after the horse has finished his work, just what you did before beginning your ride. Horses that are ready to submit to a task the second time, after having done it once, give proof enough of high spirit. To sum it all up, the least troublesome and the most serviceable to his rider in the wars would naturally be the horse that is sound-footed, gentle, sufficiently fleet, ready and able to undergo fatigue, and first and foremost, obedient. On the other hand, horses that need much urging from laziness or much coaxing and attention from being too mettlesome keep the rider's hands always engaged and take away his courage in moments of danger. Chapter 4. When one has bought a horse that he really admires and has taken him home, it is a good thing to have his stall in such a part of the establishment that his master shall very often have an eye on the animal. It is well, too, that the stable should be so arranged that the horse's food can no more be stolen out of the manger than his master's out of the storeroom. In my opinion, the man who neglects this matter is neglecting himself, for it is plain that in moments of danger the master gives his own life into the keeping of his horse. A secure stable is a good thing, not only to prevent the stealing of grain, but also because you can easily tell when the horse refuses his feed. Observing this, you may know either that there is too much blood in him, or that he has been overworked and wants rest, or that barley surfeit or some other disease is coming on. In the horse, as in the man, all diseases are easier to cure at the start than after they have become chronic and have been wrongly diagnosed. The same care which is given to the horse's food and exercise to make his body grow strong should also be devoted to keeping his feet in condition. Even naturally sound hooves get spoiled in stalls with moist, smooth floors. The floor should be sloping to avoid moisture, and to prevent smoothness, stones should be sunk close to one another, each about the size of the hooves. The mere standing on such floors strengthens the feet. Further, of course, the groom should lead the horse out somewhere to rub him down, and should loose him from the manger after breakfast, so that he may go to dinner the more readily. This place outside of the stall would be best suited to the purpose of strengthening the horse's feet if you threw down loosely 4 or 5 cartloads of round stones, each big enough to fill your hand and about 1.5 pounds in weight, surrounding the whole with an iron border to keep them from getting scattered. Standing on these would be as good for him as travelling a stony road for some part of every day, and whether he is being rubbed down or is teased by horseflies, he has to use his hooves exactly as he does in walking. Stones strewn about in this way strengthen the frogs too. As for his mouth, you must take as much care to make it soft as you take to make his hooves hard, and the same treatment softens a horse's mouth that softens a man's flesh. Chapter 5. It is also a horseman's duty, I think, to see that his groom is taught the proper way to treat the horse. First of all, he ought to know that he should never make the knot in the halter at the place where the headpiece fits round. The horse often rubs his head against the manger, and it may make sores if the halter is not easy about the ears. And of course, when there are sores, then the horse must be somewhat fretful in bridling and grooming. It is well that the groom should have orders to carry out the droppings and the litter every day to a given place. By doing so, he may get rid of it in the easiest way for himself and would be doing the horse good too. The groom must understand that he is to put the muzzle on the horse when he leads him out to be rubbed down or to the place where he rolls. In fact, the horse ought always to be muzzled whenever he is taken anywhere without a bridle. The muzzle, without hindering his breathing, allows no biting, and when it is on, it serves to keep horses from mischievous designs. The horse should by all means be fastened from above his head, for instinct makes him toss his head up when anything is worrying him about his face, and if he is fastened in this way, the tossing slackens the halter instead of pulling it taut. In grooming, begin with the head and mane. If the upper parts are not clean, it is waste labour to clean the lower parts. Next, raise the hair on the rest of the body by the use of all the ordinary cleaning implements, and then clear away the dust by working with the grain of the hair. But the hair on the backbone should never be touched by any implement at all. It is to be rubbed with the hand and softly smoothed in its natural direction, for thus the seat would be least injured. The head, however, must be washed with water. It is bony, and to clean it with iron or wood would hurt the horse. The forelock also should be wetted. This hair, even though pretty long, does not prevent the horse from seeing, but clears away from his eyes things that would hurt him. The gods, we must believe, gave this tuft to the horse instead of the huge ears which they gave to asses and mules to protect their eyes. The tail and mane should be washed, seeing that the hair must be made to grow on the tail, so that the horse, reaching out as far as possible, may switch away things that torment him, and made to grow on the neck to afford plenty to take hold of in mounting. The mane, forelock, and tail are gifts of the gods bestowed on the horse for beauty. A proof is that brood mares, as long as their hair is flowing, are not so apt to admit asses, whence all breeders of mules cut off the hair from their mares preparatory to covering. Washing down of the legs is a thing I absolutely forbid. It does no good; on the contrary, daily washing is bad for the hooves. And washing under the belly should be done very sparingly. It worries the horse more than washing anywhere else, and the cleaner these parts are made, the more they attract things under the belly that would torment it. And no matter what pains one has spent on it, the horse is no sooner led out than it gets exactly as dirty as before. These parts then should be let alone, and as for the legs, rubbing with the mere hand is quite enough. Chapter 6. Next I shall explain how a man may groom a horse with the least danger to himself and the greatest good to the animal. If he tries to clean him facing with the horse, he runs the risk of a blow in the face from knee or hoof. But if he faces just the other way and outside the reach of the leg, when he cleans him, and takes his place off the shoulder blade in rubbing him down, he will not be harmed at all, and may even bend back the hoof and attend to the horse's frog. Let him clean the hind legs in the same way. The man that takes care of the horse should know that both in this matter and in everything else which has to be done, the very last places at which he should approach to do it are in front and behind. For if the horse means mischief, these are the 2 points at which he has the advantage of a man. But by approaching him at the side, you can handle him most freely and with the least danger to yourself. When the horse is to be led, I certainly do not approve of leading him behind you, for then you have the least chance to look out for yourself, and the horse has the best chance to do whatever he likes. Then again, I object to teaching the horse to go on ahead with a long leading rein. The reason is that the horse can then do mischief on either side he pleases, and can even whirl round and face his leader. Why, only think of several horses led together in this fashion. How in the world could they be kept away from one another? But a horse that is accustomed to be led by the side can do the least mischief to other horses and to men, and would be most convenient and ready for the rider, especially if he should ever have to mount in a hurry. In order to put the bridle on properly, the groom should first come up on the near side of the horse. Then, throwing the reins over the head and letting them drop on the withers, he should take the headpiece in his right hand and offer the bit with his left. If the horse receives it, of course the headstall is to be put on. But if he does not open his mouth, the bit should be held against his teeth and the thumb of the left hand thrust within his jaw. This makes most horses open the mouth. If he does not receive the bit even then, press his lip hard against the tush. Very few horses refuse it on feeling this. Let your groom be well instructed in the following points. First, never to lead the horse by one rein, for this makes one side of the mouth harder than the other. Secondly, what is the proper distance of the bit from the corners of the mouth? If too close, it makes the mouth callous, so that it has no delicacy of feeling. But if the bit hangs too low down in the mouth, the horse can take it in his teeth and so refuse to mind it. The following must also be urged strongly upon the groom if any work at all is to be done. Willingness to receive the bit is such an important part that a horse that refuses it is utterly useless. Now, if the bridle is put on not only when he is going to be worked, but also when he is led to his food and home after exercise, it would not be at all strange if he should seize the bit of his own accord when you hold it out to him. It is well for the groom to understand how to put a rider up Persian fashion, so that his master, if he gets infirm or has grown oldish, may himself have somebody to mount him handily, or may be able to oblige another with a person to mount him. The one great precept and practice in using a horse is this: never deal with him when you are in a fit of passion. A fit of passion is a thing that has no foresight in it, and so we often have to rue the day when we gave way to it. Consequently, when your horse shies at an object and is unwilling to go up to it, he should be shown that there is nothing fearful in it, least of all to a courageous horse like him. But if this fails, touch the object yourself that seems so dreadful to him, and lead him up to it with gentleness. Compulsion and blows inspire only the more fear, for when horses are at all hurt at such a time, they may think that what they shied at is the cause of the hurt. I do not find fault with a horse for knowing how to settle down so as to be mounted easily, when the groom delivers him to the rider. Still, I think that the true horseman ought to practice and be able to mount even if the horse does not so offer himself. Different horses fall to one's lot at different times, and the same horse serves you one way at one time and another at another. Chapter 7. I shall next set down the method of riding which the horseman may find best for himself and his horse, when once he has received him for mounting. First, then, with the left hand he must take up lightly the halter which hangs from the chin strap or the nose band, holding it so slack as not to check the horse, whether he intends to raise himself by laying hold of the mane about the ears and to mount in that way, or whether he vaults on from his spear. With the right hand he must then take the reins at the withers and also grasp the mane, so that he may not wrench the horse's mouth at all as he gets up. In springing to his place, he must draw up the body with the left hand, keeping his right stiff as he raises himself with it, for in mounting thus he will not look ungraceful even from behind. The leg should be kept bent, the knee must not touch the horse's back, and the calf must be brought clean over to the off side. After having brought his foot completely round, he is then to settle down in his seat on the horse. I think it good that the horseman should practice springing up from the off side as well, on the chance that he may happen to be leading his horse with the left hand and holding his spear in his right. He has only to learn to do with the left what he did before with the right, and with the right what he did with the left. Another reason why I approve of the latter method of mounting is that the moment he is on horseback the rider would be completely ready if he should have to engage the enemy all of a sudden. When the rider takes his seat, whether bareback or on the cloth, I do not approve of a seat which is as though the man were on a chair, but rather as though he were standing upright with his legs apart. Thus he would get a better grip with his thighs on the horse, and being upright he could hurl his javelin more vigorously and strike a better blow from on horseback if need be. His foot and leg from the knee down should hang loosely, for if he keeps his leg stiff and should strike it against something, he might get it broken, but a supple leg would yield if it struck against anything without at all disturbing the thigh. Then, too, the rider should accustom himself to keep his body above the hips as supple as possible, for this would give him greater power of action, and he would be less liable to a fall if somebody should try to pull or push him off. The horse should be taught to stand still when the rider is taking his seat, and until he has drawn his skirts from under him, if necessary, made the reins even, and taken the most convenient grasp of his spear. Let him then keep his left arm at his side. This will give the rider the tidiest look, and to his hand the greatest power. As for reins, I recommend such as are alike, not weak nor slippery, and not thick either, so that if necessary the hand may hold the spear as well. When the horse gets the signal to start, let him begin at a walk, for this frets him least. If the horse carries his head low, hold the reins with the hands a bit high. If he carries it somewhat high, then rather low. This would make the most graceful appearance. Next, by taking the true trot, the horse would relax his body with the least discomfort, and come with the greatest ease into the hand gallop. And as leading with the left is the more approved way, this lead would best be reached if the signal to gallop should be given the horse at the moment when he is rising with his right in the trot. For being about to raise his left foot next, he would lead with it and would begin the stride as he comes over to the left. For the horse instinctively leads with the right on turning to the right, and with the left on turning to the left. I recommend the exercise known as the Volta, because it accustoms the horse to turn on either jaw. Changing the direction is also a good thing, that the jaws on either side may be equally suppled. But I recommend the career with sharp turns at each end rather than the complete Volta, for the horse would like turning better after he has had enough of the straight course, and thus would be practising straight away running and turning at the same time. He must be collected at the turns, because it is not easy or safe for the horse to make short turns when he is at full speed, especially if the ground is uneven or slippery. When the rider collects him, he must not throw the horse aslant at all with the bit, nor sit at all aslant himself, else he must be well aware that a slight matter will be enough to bring himself and his horse to the ground. The moment the horse faces the stretch after finishing the turn, the rider should push him on to go faster. In war, of course, turns are executed for the purpose of pursuing or retreating. Hence it is well that he should be trained to speed after turning. After the horse appears to have had enough exercise, it is well to give him a rest and then to urge him suddenly to the top of his speed, either away from other horses or towards them. Then to quiet him down out of his speed by pulling him up very short. And again, after a halt, to turn him and push him on. It is very certain that there will come times when each of these manoeuvres will be necessary. When the moment comes to dismount, never do so among other horses, nor in a crowd of bystanders, nor outside of the riding ground, but let the horse enjoy a season of rest in the very place where he is obliged to work. Chapter 8. There are many occasions, of course, when the horse will have to run downhill and uphill and along a slope, as well as to take a leap across or out of something and to jump down. So all of these movements must be learned and practiced by both horse and rider. The two will thus become obviously the more helpful and useful to one another. If it is thought that I am repeating myself, because I am speaking now of what I have spoken before, let me say that there is no repetition here. I did lay down that you should try whether the horse could do all this at the time you bought him, but what I am now urging is that a man should teach his own horse, and I shall describe the right method of instruction. With a horse that has no experience whatever in leaping, take him with the leading rein loose and leap across the ditch before him. Then draw the rein tight to make him jump over. If he refuses, let someone with a whip or stick lay it on pretty hard. He will then jump over not merely the proper distance, but a great deal more than is required. He will never need a blow after that, but will jump the minute he sees anybody coming up behind him. When he is used to taking a leap in this way, let the rider mount and put him first at small and then at larger ditches, pricking him with the spur just as he is about to leap. Prick him with the spur in the same way in teaching him to leap up and to leap down. If the horse uses his whole body at once for all these, it will be much safer for him and for his rider than if his quarters are not well gathered in as he leaps or jumps up or down. Going downhill must be taught him at first on soft ground, and finally, when he gets used to it, he will like to run down much more than to run up. As for the fears that some folks feel of dislocating the horse's shoulder in riding downhill, they should take courage from the knowledge that the horses of the Persians and Odrysians, all of which habitually run their races downhill, are not a bit less sound than Greek horses. I shall not omit to tell how the rider himself ought to conform to all these movements. When the horse bolts suddenly off, the rider should lean forward, for then the horse would be less likely to draw in under the rider and jolt him up. But he should bend back when the horse is being brought to a poise, as he would then be less jolted. In leaping a ditch or running uphill, it is not a bad thing to lay hold of the mane, so that the horse may not be troubled by the bit and the ground at the same time. Going down a steep place, the rider should throw himself well back and support the horse by the bit, so that rider and horse may not be carried headlong down the hill. It is well that the rides should be in different directions occasionally, and that they should be sometimes long and sometimes short. The horse is apt to dislike this less than riding always in the same places and over the same distance. The rider must have a firm seat when going at full speed over all sorts of ground, and must also be able to use his weapons well on horseback. Hence there is nothing to be said against the practice of riding in the hunt, where there is a suitable country with wild animals. But where these are not to be had, it is good training for two riders to arrange together, one to fly from the other on horseback over all sorts of ground, wheeling about with his spear and retreating again, while the other pursues with buttons on his javelins and on his spear. Whenever he gets within javelin shot, he is to hurl his button-tipped javelins at the runner, and to strike him with his spear when he overtakes him within striking distance. If they come to close quarters, it is well for one to pull his adversary towards him, and then to thrust him back all of a sudden. This is the way to unhorse him. But the proper thing for a man who is being pulled to do is to urge his horse forward, for by so doing he will be more likely to unhorse the other man than to get a fall himself. And if ever there is cavalry skirmishing, when two armies are set in array against each other, and the one side pursues even to the enemy's main body, while the other retreats among its friends, it is well just here to bear in mind that while one is among his friends, he is both brave and safe in wheeling among the first and pressing on at full speed, but that when he gets near the foe he should keep his horse well in hand. For thus, while doing hurt to the enemy, he could probably best escape being hurt by them himself. The gods have bestowed upon man the gift of teaching his brother man what he ought to do by word of mouth. But it is evident that by word of mouth you can teach a horse nothing. If, however, you reward him with kindness after he has done as you wish, and punish him when he disobeys, he will be most likely to learn to obey as he ought. This rule, to be sure, may be expressed in a few words, but it holds good in every branch of the art of horsemanship. For instance, he would receive the bit more readily if some good should come of it every time he received it, and he will leap and jump up and obey in all the rest if he looks forward to a season of rest on finishing what he has been directed to do. Chapter 9. So far, then, it has been stated how a person would be least likely to be cheated in buying a colt or a horse, and least likely to spoil him in use, but particularly how one could produce a horse with all the qualities that a rider needs in war. Now, on the chance that you should happen to have a horse that is either too high-mettled for the occasion or too sluggish, this is perhaps the proper time to set down how to treat either in the most correct fashion. In the first place, you are to know that mettle is to a horse what temper is to a man. Exactly, therefore, as a man who neither says nor does anything harsh would be least likely to rouse the temper of his neighbour, so one who avoids fretting a high-mettled horse would be the last to exasperate him. At the very outset, then, in mounting, care should be taken to mount without annoying him. After mounting, the rider should sit quiet more than the ordinary time, and then move him forward by the most gentle signs possible. Next, beginning very slowly, induce him in turn to quicker paces in such a way that the horse may reach full speed almost without knowing it. Every abrupt sign that you make him, sudden sights, sounds, or impressions, all disturb a high-mettled horse just as they do a man. Abruptness, you must remember, always confuses a horse. If you want to collect a high-mettled horse when he is dashing along faster than is convenient, you should not draw rein abruptly, but you should win him over gently with the bit, calming him down, not forcing him to be still. Long stretches, rather than frequent turns, calm horses down, and leisurely riding for a good while soothes, calms down, and does not rouse the spirit of the horse of mettle. But if anybody expects to calm such a horse down by tiring him out with riding swiftly and far, his supposition is just the reverse of the truth. These are exactly the circumstances in which a high-mettled horse tries to carry the day by main force, and in his wrath, like an angry man, he often does much irreparable harm to himself and his rider. A high-mettled horse must be kept from dashing on at full speed, and utterly prevented from racing with another. For, as a rule, remember the most ambitious horses are the highest mettled. Smooth bits are more suitable for such horses than rough, but if a rough one is put in, it must be made as easy as the smooth by lightness of hand. It is well also to get into the habit of sitting quiet, especially on a high-mettled horse, and utterly to avoid touching him with any other part than those which we use in securing a firm seat. You must know that it is orthodox to calm him down with a chirrup, and to rouse him by clucking. Still, if from the first you should cluck when caressing and chirrup when punishing, the horse would learn to start up at the chirrup and calm down at a cluck. So when a shout is raised or a trumpet blown, you should not let him see you disturbed, least of all should you do anything to alarm him, but should quiet him down so far as you can at such a time, and give him his breakfast or his dinner if circumstances should permit. But the best piece of advice I can give is not to get a very high-mettled horse to use in war. As for a sluggish horse, I think it sufficient to set down that your method of handling him should at all times be just the opposite to that which I recommended in the case of the high-mettled one. Chapter 10. If you desire to handle a good war horse, so as to make his action the more magnificent and striking, you must refrain from pulling at his mouth with the bit as well as from spurring and whipping him. Most people think that this is the way to make him look fine, but they only produce an effect exactly contrary to what they desire. They positively blind their horse by jerking the mouth up instead of letting them look forward, and by spurring and striking scare them into disorder and danger. This is the way horses behave that are fretted by their riders into ugly and ungraceful action. But if you teach your horse to go with a light hand on the bit, and yet to hold his head well up and to arch his neck, you will be making him do just what the animal himself glories and delights in. A proof that he really delights in it is that when a horse is turned loose and runs off to join other horses, and especially towards mares, then he holds his head up as high as he can, arches his neck in the most spirited style, lifts his legs with free action, and raises his tail. So when he is induced by a man to assume all the airs and graces which he puts on of himself when he is showing off voluntarily, the result is a horse that likes to be ridden, that presents a magnificent sight, that looks alert, that is the observed of all observers. I shall now attempt to explain how I think this result may be obtained. In the first place, you must own at least 2 bits. Let one of them be smooth, with the discs on it good sized, the other with the discs heavy, and not standing so high, but with the echini sharp, so that when he seizes it he may drop it from dislike of its roughness. Then, when he shall have received the smooth bit in its turn, he will like its smoothness, and do everything on the smooth bit which he has been trained to do on the rough. He may, however, come not to mind its smoothness, and to bear hard upon it, and this is why we put the large discs on the smooth bit, to make him keep his jaws apart and drop the bit. You can make the rough bit anything you like, by holding it lightly or drawing it tight. No matter what the kind of bit, it must always be flexible. When a horse seizes a stiff bit, he holds the whole of it at once against his bars. He lifts it all, just as a man does a spit, at whatever point he takes it up. But the other kind acts like a chain. Only the part that you are grasping remains unbending, and the rest hangs loose. So, as the horse is always after the part that is getting away from him in his mouth, he drops the bit from his bars. For the same reason, little rings are hung from the joints of the bit in the middle, so that the horse, in trying to catch them with his tongue and teeth, may not think of snatching up the bit against his bars. I will set down the definitions of flexible and stiff bits, in case some reader may not know them. The bit is flexible when the joints are broad and smooth where they meet, so that it bends easily, and all the pieces put on round the joints are more likely to be flexible if they are roomy and not tight. On the contrary, if the different parts of the bit do not run and play into each other easily, the bit is a stiff one. Whatever the kind of bit, it must be used according to the following rules, which are in every case the same, provided that it is desired to give a horse the look that has been described. The horse's mouth must not be checked too harshly, so that he will toss his head, nor too gently for him to feel it. The moment he acknowledges it, and begins to raise his neck, give him the bit. And in everything else, as I have insisted over and over again, the horse should be rewarded as long as he behaves well. When you see a horse show his pleasure by carrying his neck high and yielding to the hand, there is no need of using harsh measures, as though you were forcing him to work. He should rather be coaxed on, as when you wish him to rest. He will then go forward most cheerfully to his swift paces. A proof that the horse enjoys fast running is that when he has got loose he never moves at a walk, but runs. It is his nature to enjoy it, unless he is obliged to run an excessive distance. Neither horse nor man likes anything in the world that is excessive. When it comes to his riding in a proud and stately style, in the first part of his training we accustomed him, you remember, to dash forward at full speed after making the turns. Well, after he has learned this, if you support him by the bit and at the same moment give him one of the signs to dash forward, the bit holds him in and the signal to advance rouses him up. He will then throw out his chest and raise his legs rather high and furiously, though not flexibly, for horses do not use their legs very flexibly when they are being hurt. Now if, when his fire is thus kindled, you let him have the bit, the slackness of it makes him think that he is given his head. And in his joy thereat he will bound along with proud gait and prancing legs, imitating exactly the airs that he puts on before other horses. Everybody that sees such a horse cries out that he is free, willing, fit to ride, high mettled, brilliant, and at once beautiful and fiery in appearance. So much for this subject, in case you are an admirer of such action. Chapter 11. If you chance to wish to own a horse for parade, a high stepper and of showy action, such qualities are not, as a rule, to be found in every horse, but he must have, to start with, the natural gifts of high spirit and strong body. Some people fancy that if a horse has supple legs, it follows that he will be able to rear his body on them, but this is not the fact. It is the horse with supple loins, and short and strong ones too, that can do this. I do not mean the loins at the tail, but at the belly, between the ribs and the haunches. Such a horse will be able to gather the hind legs well in under the fore. Now, when he has gathered them well in, if you take him up by the bit, he falls back on his hocks and raises his forehand so that his belly and sheath can be seen from the front. You must give him the bit when he does this, and it will look to the spectators as if he were doing all of his own accord the prettiest feat that a horse can do. There are, to be sure, some persons who teach this movement, either by tapping the hocks with a rod, or by directing someone to run along by the side and strike him with a stick under the gaskins. But for my part, I think, as I have said all along, that it is the best of lessons if the horse gets a season of repose whenever he has behaved to his rider's satisfaction. For what the horse does under compulsion, as Simon also observes, is done without understanding, and there is no beauty in it either, any more than if one should whip and spur a dancer. There would be a great deal more ungracefulness than beauty in either a horse or a man that was so treated. No, he should show off all his finest and most brilliant performances willingly, and at a mere sign. If he goes on at his exercise till he is covered with sweat, and then if you dismount and unbridle him the moment he rears up in fine style, you must be sure that he will come to the act of rearing with a will. This is the attitude in which the horses of gods and heroes are always depicted, and men who can handle a horse gracefully in it are a magnificent sight. The horse rearing thus is such a thing of wonder as to fix the eyes of all beholders, young or old. Nobody, I assure you, either leaves him or gets tired of watching him as long as he presents the brilliant spectacle. Yet if it chance that the owner of such a horse should command a troop or regiment of cavalry, he should not aspire to be the only brilliant figure himself, but should try all the more to make the whole line that follows a sight worth seeing. If he goes on ahead at an extremely slow pace, with his horse rearing very high and very often, it is obvious that the rest of the horses would have to follow him at a walk. What could there be at all brilliant in such a sight as this? But if you rouse your horse and take the lead at a gait neither too fast nor too slow, but simply suited to the horses that are most spirited, alert, and graceful in action, with such leading the general effect is complete, and the horses prance and snort all together, so that not only you yourself but all that follow after would be a sight well worth seeing. To conclude, if a man buys his horses skilfully, feeds them so that they can bear fatigue, and handles them properly in training them for war, in exercising them for the parade, and in actual service in the field, what is there to prevent him from making his horses more valuable than when he acquired them, and hence from owning horses that are famous, and from becoming famous himself in the art of horsemanship? Nothing except the interposition of some divinity. Chapter 12. I wish also to set down how the man who is to run the hazard of battle on horseback should be armed. To begin with the cuirass. This must always be made to fit the body, for if it fits well the body supports its weight, but if it is very loose the shoulders have to carry it all by themselves. As for too tight a cuirass, it is a straitjacket and not a piece of armour. Next, as the neck is one of the vital parts, I say that a covering should be made for it rising from out of the cuirass itself to fit the neck. This will at once be an ornament, for if it is made as it should be, it will cover the rider's face when he pleases as far as the nose. For a helmet, the Viotian is the best, in my opinion, since it most completely protects all the parts that are above the cuirass, without preventing you from seeing. Let the cuirass be made so as not to hinder sitting nor stooping. Round the belly, the groin, and thereabouts, there should be flaps of such material and number as to protect these parts. Since the horseman is disabled if anything happens to his left arm, I consequently recommend the newly invented piece of armour called the arm. It protects the shoulder, the arm, the elbow, and the part that holds the reins, and it can be extended or bent together. Besides, it covers the gap left by the cuirass under the armpit. The right arm must of course be raised whenever the rider wants to hurl his javelin or to strike a blow. The part of the cuirass that hinders this must therefore be removed, and in its place flaps put on at the joints, unfolding altogether when the arm is raised and closing when it is lowered. For the arm itself, something worn like a greave seems to me better than to have it of a piece with the cuirass. The part of the arm that is bared when it is raised must be protected near the cuirass with calfskin or bronze, else it will be left unguarded in its most vital part. Now, as the rider himself is in extreme danger if anything happens to his horse, the animal also should be armed with a frontlet, breastplate, and thigh pieces. The last serve at the same time to cover the thighs of the rider. Above all, the horse's belly should be protected, as being the most vital and the weakest part. It may be protected with the cloth. This cloth must also be of such material and so sewed together so as to give the rider a safe seat and not to gall the horse's back. For the rest, this should be the armour for horse and man. But as the shins and feet would of course project below the thigh pieces, they too may be armed with top boots of the leather of which shoes are made. These will at once protect the shins and cover the feet. This, and the grace of the gods, is the defensive armour. For offensive, I recommend the sabre rather than the sword, for the rider being aloft, a scimitar blow will be more in place than the thrust of a sword. Instead of a spear of scantling, which is weak and clumsy to carry, I am inclined to recommend 2 javelins made of cornel wood. A skilful person can throw one and then use the other in front, on the flank, or in the rear. They are also stronger than the spear and handier to carry. I recommend hurling the javelin at the longest possible range. This gives more time to recover oneself and to seize the other javelin. I will set down in a few words the best method of hurling the javelin. Throw forward the left, draw back the right, rise from the thighs, and let it go with the point slightly raised. Then it will carry with the greatest force and the longest range, and it will be sure to hit the mark provided the point is always aimed at the mark when you let it go. This completes the hints, lessons, and exercises on which I was to write for the private. The knowledge and practice necessary for the commander of cavalry have been set forth already in a different work. End of Xenophon on Horsemanship, translated by Maurice H. Morgan, Ph.D., Assistant Professor, Harvard University.